So, what happens when India's biggest private bank gets hit with a sudden dramatic shakeup right at the very top? What does that really mean for its customers, for investors, for the entire financial system? All right, let's dive into this. This is a story about ethics, some very risky bonds, and what looks like a real crisis of confidence at HDFC Bank. And this is where it all kicks off. Not with some market rumor, but with these words. These are incredibly powerful words coming from the bank's own chairman, Atanu Chakrabarti. I mean, that's the kind of statement that makes absolutely everyone, from Mumbai to New York, just stop and listen. You don't just walk away from a job like that over nothing. The resignation itself, it was a bombshell, no question. But as it turns out, that was just the opening act. It was the first domino to fall in a much bigger drama that was about to expose some really deep-seated issues inside this banking giant. Okay, so let's break down what happened right away. March 17th, the chairman is out, effective immediately, and he says it's because of a clash with his personal ethics. The market, well, it freaks out instantly. The stock just tanks. The bank scrambles and appoints an interim chairman to calm things down. But here's where it gets kind of weird. India's central bank, the RBI, comes out and says, nope, no material concerns on record. So you've got the chairman screaming fire, the market running for the exits, and the regulators saying everything's fine? What was actually going on here? Well, we didn't have to wait long for the other shoe to drop. The chairman's vague statement about practices inside the bank was about to get very, very specific. Just days after the chairman walked, the bank fired 3 senior executives. Now, come on, that is not a coincidence. That's a direct consequence, and it started to point a finger at exactly where the problem was. Suddenly, those ethical concerns had a location. And that location was thousands of miles away from the bank's headquarters in Mumbai. Turns out, the firings were tied directly to its international branch in Dubai and to a scandal that had been bubbling under the surface for months. Let's unpack this whole thing. So the heart of the problem was this: the alleged mis-selling of a very specific and very, very risky financial product. And this was being sold to their overseas clients. We're not talking about a simple error here. The claims were that the bank was pushing customers into investments that were totally wrong for them, and maybe not being totally upfront about it either. And the allegations, they paint a picture of a pretty systematic process. First, they allegedly targeted non-resident Indian clients. Then, to even get them approved for these complicated investments, their incomes were supposedly inflated on paper. After that, they were promised these amazing high returns. We're talking 12, 13%. But, and this is the absolute key, the huge, massive risks that came with it, those were reportedly just swept under the rug. Now, to really understand why this is such a big deal, we need to talk about the product at the center of all this. It's something called an AT1 bond. And let me tell you, this is not your average safe investment. To put it simply, think of AT1 bonds as a special kind of IOU that banks issue to raise money. They're perpetual, which is just a fancy way of saying the bank never actually has to pay you your initial investment back. In return for that huge risk, they offer really high interest. And the difference is just, it's night and day. With a regular bond, you know you're getting your money back on a specific date. It's pretty straightforward. With an AT1 bond, sure, you might get those juicy interest payments, but there is a massive catch. If the bank that issued them gets into serious trouble, it can literally just decide to wipe out the value of those bonds, down to zero. Your entire investment can just vanish. Poof. And this is not some theoretical what-if risk. This actually happened, and it was a catastrophe for investors. The type of bonds that HDFC's Dubai branch was allegedly selling were linked to Credit Suisse. And when that bank went under in 2023, regulators ordered a complete write-off of 17 times billion dollars worth of its AT1 bonds. Investors lost every penny. This is the exact risk that was allegedly downplayed to HDFC's clients. So, you have to ask, was this Dubai scandal just a one-off, a few bad apples? Well, if we zoom out and look at the bank's track record lately, a very different picture starts to emerge. This whole incident seems to be just one part of a much wider pattern of compliance and regulatory headaches. And you can see that pattern pretty clearly when you just look at the timeline. It goes back to late 2020, when the RBI literally banned the bank from issuing new credit cards because their IT systems were so unreliable. Then you see a whole string of fines for all sorts of things: violating deposit rules, poor debt collection, failing on basic know your customer rules. And importantly, even before the firings,
Dubai's own regulator had already stepped in and stopped that branch from taking on new clients.
What's really striking here is that it isn't one single area of failure. You've got problems with technology, with customer service, with basic compliance like KYC, and with how an international branch is run. It really paints a picture of a massive institution that's struggling to keep all the different parts of its operation in line. So, all of this brings us back to today. You have a chairman gone, executives fired, and a history of regulatory slip-ups laid bare for everyone to see. What does this all mean for India's biggest private bank right now?
Well, the most immediate answer is right there in the market's reaction. You can see it clear as day. The chairman's resignation just vaporized a huge chunk of the bank's value in a couple of days. Investor confidence, which was once rock solid, has been seriously shaken. So even though the RBI tried to calm everyone down, the market is sending a clear signal that it sees a real problem.
So really, when you boil it all down, what started as one man's crisis of conscience ended up pulling back the curtain on a whole lot of issues. It exposed a really nasty scandal with these high-risk bonds, but it also shined a spotlight on a much longer pattern of compliance problems. The market's nervous, and the big question now isn't about one scandal, but about the bank's entire internal culture.
And that's the final critical question we're left with. The bank has taken some action, sure, but the damage to its reputation is very real. Can a bank this big, this important, truly fix its internal culture to make sure this kind of thing doesn't happen again? The answer to that question is going to define its future, and honestly, it'll send ripples across India's entire economy.